Brought to you by concordiatheology.org, bringing you resources that support the vigorous life of the mind in service of the gospel of Christ.
Welcome to Tangible, Theology Learned and Lived. We're exploring the ways in which theology permeates all aspects of life. Through conversations with faculty at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis, we will challenge you to deepen your theology and live out your faith in Christ. I'm your producer and host, Jessica Bordelot. I'll talk with a variety of professors on a variety of topics, something different every episode, but all pointing to the intersection of faith and daily life, because it's tangible, theology learned and lived. So today we're talking about the other Lutherans, the ones who don't live in the Midwest. They don't even live in the United States. Our guests are Dr. Samuel Deressa and Dr. Leo Sánchez, who together co-edited the book, The Other Lutherans, Voices from the Global South. Dr. Samuel Deressa is Associate Professor of Theology and the Global South at Concordia University in St. Paul, Minnesota, where he also serves as the director of the DCO program, which is the Director of Christian Outreach Program. Before joining the faculty at Concordia University in 2018, he earned his PhD in Congregational Mission and Leadership and served on the Faculty of Theology at Concordia Seminary in Ethiopia. Dr. Leo Sánchez is Professor of Systematic Theology and of Hispanic Ministries here at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis. He's been here since 2004. His area of expertise is in Spirit Christology, in which he's written a number of books, but today we are focusing on his other area of expertise, which is immigration, Hispanic ministry, and in that vein, he's published Immigrant Neighbors Among Us, Immigration Across Theological Traditions. If you'd like to hear more about that work, we have a whole episode where I talked with him about that. And then he co-edited with Dr. Deressa, The Other Lutherans, Voices from the Global South. Dr. Sánchez, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So both of you have described yourself as coming from Global South Christianity. What does that mean?
Well, Global South Christianity is the non-Western world. So, historians kind of divide the world into the northern and southern hemisphere. And the northern is basically the Western world. And the southern means the others, the non-Western world, such as Africa, Asia, and Latin America.
So in your experience then, from being from the Global South, what led you to the Lutheran Church?
Well, I actually came to the Lutheran Church through the witness of a family of farmers in Williamsburg, Iowa. I was born in Chile and raised in Panama, but I was here on a foreign exchange program in high school, and so they were Lutherans, and they invited me to church, and so I attended the Lutheran Church for the first time, and that's kind of what brought me into the Lutheran Church. I was already familiar with Roman Catholicism, which is huge in the Global South, particularly in Latin America, because of the history of conquest and colonization, and the Catholic presence has been historic there. And I also used to hang out with Pentecostal friends, another major presence in the Global South, the presence of charismatic Pentecostal churches. So I experienced that in the Global South in Latin America. Coming to the U.S., I was introduced to the Lutheran faith, and that led into a journey of catechesis and a journey of formation for ministry in the Lutheran Church. And then the question about how does the Lutheran faith communicate in a U.S. context where you also have, even though it's a Western context, you also have the presence of Global South peoples in the form of migrants and their children as well. So at some point, the question was, how does someone who came from the Global South and became a Lutheran in the Global North now also have a place in sharing the Lutheran faith to Global South peoples in the North?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, it's the movements of peoples is a reality of the modern world. And we see that in the United States as well. So it's a good reason also for the importance of being familiar with Global South studies, because we learn about people in the non-Western world, but also people of the non-Western world in the Western world.
Right.
But that's how I came into the Lutheran Church.
What about you, Dr. Deressa?
Well, I was born in the Lutheran Church and raised in the Lutheran Church. So my father was a professor of theology and a pastor in a Lutheran church in Ethiopia. So I had no option except being Lutheran. Yeah, and so the Ethiopian Lutheran Church, with 12 million members now, over 12 million members actually, is the largest Lutheran church in the world right now. So that is my background.
That's more than the entire LCMS because we're only 1.7 million.
Well, not just the LCMS, but the Lutheran Church in Ethiopia is larger than all the Lutheran churches in America combined, and probably threefold, or 3 times more Lutherans in Ethiopia than all the Lutheran churches in America combined. So, yeah.
That's not quite what our limited scope leads us to think.
Right.
Right. Oh, that's wonderful.
And it's interesting also that when one thinks of Lutheranism, one often thinks, German or Scandinavian or some kind of Western phenomenon. And while this is true in many ways, in terms of the early history of Lutheranism, the largest numbers of Lutherans are actually in the global South. And so for Professor Deressa to say, I didn't become a Lutheran, I started out as one in the global South is actually quite telling already. What does it mean to be Lutheran? And what contributions and voices in Lutheranism should we be paying attention to?
And that's the topic of the book that you co-edited together.
Exactly. Yeah, the other Lutherans. And the main reason why we actually began to talk about it in 2018 when I started teaching at Concordia St. Paul. And, I still remember our conversation because we know that there are many things that the theologians in the global South, Lutheran theologians, could contribute to some of the conversations that are happening here in the States and other places too. But we seem to not pay attention to, whatever is, being talked about or the conversation in other parts of the world. Because here we are so much into what is happening here, like, into ourselves and in many cases. So that is why we began to have this conversation about, bringing together these African, Asian, and Latin American Lutheran theologians, and in a way ask them, it's like, based on your context now, what do you think the rest of the world can learn from you? So in terms of music and theology and different practices in other parts of the world, and things that are working and not working, and like the things that you are struggling as theologians. So that is what this conversation what sparked, really interesting insights, and that is why the book is basically divided into 3. And the theology section mainly dealing with theology in the global South from a Lutheran perspective. And the second one is more on music and worship tradition, which is fascinating to also and not only learn that there are different worship traditions in other parts of the world that are Lutherans, and also fueling the growth of the church and its theology to really spread like wildfire in many places. And the third part is basically on mission, like how do Lutherans in other parts of the world think about God's mission unfold in their own context, learning from each other based on how we address or how we apply Lutheran theology in all these different contexts.
Faith, truth is embodied. Truth is holistic in the global South. It is practice. It's more like wisdom in the Old Testament. It's not just the mind apart from everything else. It's the whole person, expressing truth as wisdom and so on. And then conservative, high view of the scriptures in the global South typically, conservative when it comes to things like abortion, for example.
So the way Lutheranism kind of manifests itself is through different expression. And learning about that by itself, like we can be Lutherans even though we express it differently. So we have the same scripture and the same confession, whereas the way we express it is somewhat different. It's very interesting. We have, of course, about 95% white, right? Mostly Germans, I would say. Whereas the 5% is so diverse. Now, the 5% still is not a small number. It's not a small number. Still, expressing their faith, their Lutheran faith, in different ways. The Chinese and Ethiopians and Koreans, and the Sudanese and Eritreans and the Hispanic and and differently, and knowing all these different cultures, and that really helps you in so many different ways, and mostly in terms of communicating the gospel to people that are coming from other part of the world, and to people with different cultures. And I think I teach at the university where we have diverse group of students, and students coming from Africa and Asia and Latin America. So really understanding, having that multicultural, experience is very helpful to communicate the gospel to those people. So America is diverse. And therefore, the only way we can be a church of the future is, if we recognize that and begin to, communicate the gospel in such a way, and in a way that is reflected in the way we do worship, in the way we do mission, in the way we do theology, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Describe the Lutheran Church in Ethiopia.
Well, the Lutheran Church in Ethiopia. So it all started about 120 years ago with the missionaries from Sweden and Germany, and a very fascinating story. So at that time, of course, they were not allowed to go into the country because the king at the time did not trust white people, because they were colonizing other African and so on. So he heard about what was going on, and he was like, no white people allowed to come into the country. So they stayed at the border, and they planted a mission station in today's Eritrea, which was part of Ethiopia at the time, and they began to free slaves, being at the border, and then train them as missionaries, and then send them back to their own people. So when they went back to their own people, they translated the whole Bible into local languages, into the Oromo language. And so they are the ones who started with just a few number, and just 120 years ago.
Wow.
They were missionary from the start.
Yes.
And they were developing leaders from the start.
Right.
And sending them out.
Sending them out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Ethiopians are now sending missionaries to the Middle East and other places too. So, yeah.
And to the United States.
And to the United States. Yes. As immigrants. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which again shows the movement of global South Christianity even into the global North, which then also revitalizes the church. It invites the church to live in a more Catholic reality, meaning in a more universal reality, right? Seeing that we are a church that is one, but also a church of all nations, tribes, and so on. Sometimes you could say that, but not always see that, depending on where you are, in the country. So to embody that and to invite us into that sort of life, it's a major blessing, so that we can then learn from their contributions to the expression of Lutheran theology, Lutheran worship, Lutheran teaching, and so we can learn.
Right. The other thing to add to this is here it does seem that we have also detached our emotions, so to say, during worship and so on, and we just do it up here and in our mind, and mind and our emotion totally disconnected. But in the global south, every worship is also expressed emotionally. People dance when they worship, and you can see that everywhere. I was just a few months ago, I was in Ethiopia. Then prior to that, I was in Costa Rica. In both places, what is common, like you can imagine, Ethiopia and Costa Rica, they're dancing when they worship, and I'm like, so beautiful, right? But here, I don't know how we ended up being like this as Lutherans, how we are, the reason why we are detached from our emotions during worship and so on. But something that is common in the global south is actually, you worship with your whole self. And which is also expressed through your emotion, right? You see people crying, and both men and women, whenever they feel like when they're touched, you can just see them.
There is a long history in Western Christianity of suspicion about the senses and the body and the material, sort of getting in the way of the spiritual and the devotional, and of course you have to discern emotions to see if they're channeled properly in the ways of God and Christ and what is good. But you should also discern reason, and make sure that the rational does not get in the way. Yeah,
the rational can get in the way of the gospel. Tell me more. I'm obviously from the north, the global north.
If we're all about reason, then there are a lot of things that don't make sense in the gospel, because we're talking about God's miraculous work among us, and reason cannot explain that either. And so I think rather than having a fight over reason and emotion, the thing is simply to say God has created us, for a relationship with Him, and He does that through Christ and through His Word, and He engages, us in praise and worship through His Word, and He engages the whole person, and so that means that we worship God with our mind, but also with our hearts, with our body, so it's the whole thing, right? And that is okay,
Tell me
well,
more.
I was just saying that with feelings, I think that sometimes that word, the implication that one should be suspicious of them because they're not rational, okay, which is kind of a Western dualism thing. You also have this sense that feeling is something that is just passing by, or it only has to do with immediate gratification or happiness. Is that therapeutic thing in the West. And it doesn't have an anchor. It doesn't have anything that's oriented towards. And it strikes me that this is not the way Global South people think about feeling. Feeling in the Global South context is a meatier context. There's more meat to it. It has to do with the sense of things. That's not just a fleeting thing. That has to do with a sense of reality taking hold of you, and that's a different understanding of feeling or sense. And I think it's when you kind of listen more deeply to what Christians are doing and saying in the Global South, including Lutherans, you can kind of see that there are different layers of meaning that sometimes we don't mean the same thing when we talk about feeling.
Right.
It's not just something merely subjective. It's something quite objective and communal and anchor in reality.
Right.
You know, and that's a rich way of thinking about feelings and emotions more holistically. You know. How about the Reformation missiology? You want to say something?
Yeah, one thing that I think we should really start to think about is about the future of Lutheranism now, because on the one hand we have the decline of churches here in the Western world, such as recently I've been reading about the predictions of the ELCA and our church as well. That probably in about 25 to 40 years, and probably, we won't be talking about Lutheranism the same way we talk about these churches today. And the ELCA Church, I think, recently have come up with this prediction that by 2050 there won't be any Lutheran church in America. And some of our scholars, and even in our church, are predicting almost the same thing. Probably, 30 years, 40 years, so the number really going down significantly. So, what does that really mean for the future of Lutheranism? Whereas when it comes to the Lutherans in other parts of the world, the growth is insane, and it's like the Lutheran Church, Ethiopia, Tanzania, like the whole Africa, and and the whole Asian countries, and in Latin American countries too. Now, Christianity is really growing very, very fast too. So, what is the implication of that, and what can we do today for the future of Lutheranism? And that is what we really intentionally, where we need to be really intentional. And so, like, if we, as Lutheran Church Missouri Synod now, don't position ourselves in a way that we relate with other churches globally, in a way that we can shape their future identity, and think intentionally about shaping the future of Lutheranism, then we won't have any contribution in terms of what happens in 20 years and 30 years and so on. So not just in terms of what is happening here, but also in terms of what's happening globally. And I think the other thing that we should really pay attention to is also the change in demography now and its implication for America, and research after research now, and in terms of statistics, have been coming out recently that, for example, when you take Americans who are 20 years and younger, so those are the ones that are minority now are the majority, in a sense. The white community are the minority when it comes to Americans that are 20 years and younger. That means now, if we don't have a church that is diverse, and if we don't have the church that is ready to embrace this diversity and move towards this multicultural and multiethnic type of the kind of, and adopting that kind of church and without being strategic, then I think the future of our church and the future of Lutheranism for the future will be in question. Things are unfolding globally, and how we can be part of the change, in global terms, in shaping the future of Lutheranism, by actively participating in what happens globally as well. Yeah.
And also in a way that might lead to ask questions such as, how should we relate in this corner of the global north to neighbors among us from the global south and to their children? And what can we learn from them? on the one hand, what can we teach them, but also what can we learn from them, so that we are enriched by that mutual give and take. I think if we can practice this sort of mutually enriching way of living together, if we can practice this at the congregational level, if we can embodying this intercommunion of love and learning, then we could probably do it at other levels too. Like at the level of the district, or the level of the synod, or the transnational level of partner churches, and so on. And if we can embody this way of life congregationally in how we interact with one another, then I think over time we could fulfill the promise of a global Lutheranism, one in which people no longer think, oh, Lutheranism must only have to do with the North somehow. But no, it's already a Southern reality, And so what I would hope is that the presence of brothers and sisters from the global South out there and in here would foster in us a more global, Catholic, universal, intercultural way of being Lutheran, But, one thing is to talk about it. Another thing is to ask the Spirit. Here we go. We need the Spirit, right? Yeah. To shape us in such a way that we live with one another, sharing each other's gifts, joys, and also burdens. So that's my prayer, that we walk together towards that richer vision and potential and promise of a more global Catholic Lutheran Church.
Well, what I would just add to that is being intentional in a kind of developing a skill, to minister among people of different cultures is, what we need to be intentional about as DCEs and DCOs. And at Concordia University, we are very intentional on this, and knowing that, the context to which we are going to send our students is going to be more diverse in the coming years. Even our university is just like that, so very diverse in many ways. So you are going to serve, if you are coming to Minnesota, the Somali Muslims and, the Bangladesh, and other places, they're going to be your neighbors. So you can't ignore them. So you can, that is your option. You can ignore everybody and live your life. But that is not the gospel, and that is not what we are called to be like. So as a church, we are called to serve our neighbors, or to reach out to all these different people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. So knowing your call is one thing, but also being ready and having the skill to connect with people and to communicate people of different cultures is something different. It all begins by befriending them and enjoying their food. And it just starts with a small thing. And then you can communicate the gospel effectively. But what we the mistake that we usually do is, just because we have a church in their community, then we expect them to find the church and join the church, and we somewhat, I don't know where this is coming from, we just have this feeling that the church has some magnetic kind of magic that draws people into our church, but that never happened, and that doesn't happen. Mission is not done that way. So we have to be a church that connects with the community the correct way, that through the relationship, right? Embody the life and the love of Christ in those communities.
Our final question on the show is always this: what do you want our listeners to remember?
Well, I guess one thing would be to remember that we have brothers and sisters in Christ in the global South. And we have them both out there and also in here, both in other countries, but also in our own country. And to welcome that realization with a great deal of thanksgiving to God.
So as a small boy, I was talking to my grandfather, who told me about how he became a Christian. And I was just probably first or second grade. And I was like, how did these whole people become a Christian? And he was like, well, let me tell you the story. He said, so he talked about this German missionary who once fixed his car. So, and he was like, I was driving by and like my car broke and I didn't know how to fix it. And there was this very tall German missionary who came and he fixed my car. And the next day I took a gift of a goat. He said, I had this goat and I took it to his house as a gift. And my grandfather never went to school and he was just a farmer. So he took this gift and gave it to this German missionary. And then that German missionary instead gave him a Bible. And he's like, what do I do with this book? Like, I don't even read. And this missionary was like, well, if you have somebody in your house who could read, then maybe you can understand, read the gospel that way. And he was like, well, my children goes to school. So he took the Bible with himself. And that is how the whole family, including my father, they became Christians. And in 2009, when I went to Germany, now in Hermannsburg, this very little village named Hermannsburg now, not even a big town, I was just walking by, I hear somebody talk my mother tongue and calling me and saying, do you like to have coffee in Oromo language in Ethiopia? And I was, who is speaking in Oromo? Everybody that I saw was just white Germans. And I turned around and this was the missionary that my grandfather was talking about. And
wow.
What is your name? When he told me his name and I remembered the story and I was like, and do you know Deressa? And he was like, how are you connected with Deressa? And I'm his my grandfather. And he literally began crying. And we had coffee and and he was even correcting my language. And and he was like, well, you youngsters, you're twisting everything. So this is how you say these words. And very, very interesting experience. So the question is how did he do it as a missionary? So he immersed himself in that culture, right? And he fixed the cars and he just lived, he embodied the love of Christ for that community. The whole village now turned into Lutheran Christians. This is what we are called to do, right? To be in those communities and embody Christ's love for those people. Your calling is for God's people, to reach out to the community, not just for 100 or 200 people that calls you to serve in that congregation.
Amen. And to the DCOs and DCEs, we add the pastors and deaconesses.
Right, those two, yeah.
And teachers.
Yeah.
And teachers.
Thank you. Yeah.
Especially teachers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Dr. Deressa, thank you so much for taking time to meet with us while you were in Missouri. I hope to have you back on the show whenever you're in town again.
Oh, sure. Glad to be here. Yeah.
Dr. Sánchez, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Hello, listeners. I want to tell you about a free resource we produced called Befriending Neighbors. It's a downloadable video curriculum that equips congregations to serve and empower immigrants. The videos are real-life stories of Lutheran volunteers who work together to walk alongside immigrants in their community. The written guide includes processing activities to help you do the same. Thanks to a generous grant, we are able to offer Befriending Neighbors for free. You just have to register and download it. I recommend it even if just to watch the videos on your own because the stories are powerful. You can find Befriending Neighbors at concordiatheology.org. It's under the tab Resources. I'm your producer and host, Jessica Bordolo. Join me next time when we talk about the intersection of theology and daily life, because it's tangible. Theology learned and lived.